For as long as I can remember, I've always heard this phrase, regulations are written in blood. What does this mean? Recently, I've been following the Rust movie tragedy and saw that the weapons armorer of the film, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for involuntary manslaughter after loading a prop gun that led to the tragic passing of the film's cinematographer, Helena Hutchins. Alec Baldwin has also become the hot topic of conversation regarding this topic, but that's not what we're here to talk about, as is obvious from the title of this video. After watching this whole Rust saga, my gripe is mainly this. Why are on-set disasters still a thing? Why do people still have to get seriously hurt, lose their lives, lose their limbs, or get paralyzed for filmmakers, producers, stunt coordinators to actually take on-set safety seriously? To answer this question of the lack of safety in the movie industry, we have to travel back no farther than 40 years ago on the set of Twilight Zone the movie, where director John Landis, producer Steven Spielberg, and Warner Brothers Studios were tied to a project that led to perhaps one of the most disastrous on-set accidents in Hollywood history, a moment where time stood still and only the screams of the families could be heard. Hi, my name is Shri, and let's learn something together. A big reason why the lack of safety for actors and stuntmen is still not a great topic of conversation till this day is because actors and stuntmen fear that if they do speak up or if they reject a particular project, they may never get to work again. These kinds of hazardous duty, often called bumps, do come with some good pay, but this is the exact kind of fear or hush-hush nature of these dangers that actors and stuntmen faced against the tyranny of the director in the Twilight Zone film set that people still face to this day. It's what led to Vic Morrow, one of the actors on the set, to keep quiet about the dangers that he himself witnessed and was disturbed by. And it is what led to the alleged unethical hiring and overworking of the two children, Micah Dinley, age 7, and Renee Shin Yi Chen, age 6, that was not objected by any safety officer or crew member on set. But we're jumping way too far ahead. Before we talk about that fateful day, let's briefly mention what the Twilight Zone really is and how this movie was filmed differently than the others. The Twilight Zone was a television series that lasted 5 seasons, and it's one of the most popular and most talked about shows to this day. So much so that 60 years later, it still holds a 100% critic score and a 96% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I haven't seen the show yet, but for this video, I went ahead and watched the film, and from what I gathered is that this show, created by Rod Serling, is an anthology series where ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, such as time travel, telepathy, futuristic societies, alien invasions, and more in its 150 episode run, and these disturbing experiences were what was described as entering the Twilight Zone. Every episode is a standalone story, like Black Mirror, and they didn't have any permanent cast except for one, the narrator, who appeared at the start and end of each episode. The show grappled with themes such as morality, humanity, power, ethics, greed, and self-acceptance, and had little to no controversy except maybe a single episode called The Encounter, where the episode's apparent good intentions in portraying the consequences of racism were mostly undermined by its mishandling of the theme. But the show was mostly beloved by critics and audiences alike, and the studios decided to capitalize on this love by adapting the series to the big screen. Twilight Zone the movie didn't get the same amount of love from the critics or from the audience. Created in the same anthology format, this movie was divided into 4 episodes. In the first one, racist Bill Connor, played by Vic Morrow, becomes Jewish in World War II. In the next one, Mr. Bloom, played by Scatman Crothers, comes to a retirement home and helps the aging residents feel young and playful again. In the third episode, teacher Helen Foley, played by Kathleen Quinlan, meets a young boy named Anthony, played by Jeremy Licht, who is a little different than he looks. Finally, terrified plane passenger John Valentine, aka John Lithgow, sees gremlins attacking his flight. It was loosely based on 2 Twilight Zone episodes, A Quality of Mercy and Death's Head Revisited, along with another episode and an original one. John Landis directed the prologue and the first segment, Steven Spielberg directed the second, Joe Dante III and George Miller of Mad Max fame directed the final segment. We won't be bothering with the 3 segments directed by Spielberg, Dante, or Miller, but we'll be focusing on the first segment directed by John Landis, which is easily regarded as the most disastrous accident in Hollywood history. Wow, it's really thundering outside. What a coincidence. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's go back to a few days before at the inception of the disaster. This was the time when Apocalypse Now by Coppola was all the rage. Auteur directors were making a name for themselves, and allegedly, John Landis wanted to be in that director's Hall of Fame. He wanted his own Apocalypse Now, his own Vietnam War flick, and Twilight Zone gave him that opportunity. In the remaking of an old Twilight Zone episode named The Quality of Mercy, Landis made a few changes to the script, the biggest one being changing the main racist character, Bill Connor, into a more humane one, who after being transported through time in Nazi-occupied Germany and Alabama in the 50s, saw the horrors of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and the KKK, which changed his views in the process, and ended with the character rescuing 2 children in the middle of the Vietnam War. This is where the problems began. In order for the main character Bill Connor, played by Vic Morrow, to swoop in and rescue the 2 kids, the director Landis had to create several explosions and use a helicopter. Things were looser in the 80s, sure, but there were still rules and regulations in place, and Landis decided to break some of them. For starters, you cannot work child actors into the night, especially around explosives. You can have them during the daytime in like a fake night-like setting, but remember, Landis was in his realism arc. So he decides that he is above the law, that he is above hiring little people as children as his staff advised, and no daytime shoots. Everything must be at night and everything must be practical. So to evade state law, the children were paid under the table $500 each. $500 for a human life, okay. Second, and this one is more abhorrent, Landis instructs his associate producer George Folsey to tell the parents of the 2 kids that if they spot the fire safety official on set, to mention that they were friends, not parents of the child actors on set, nor mention anything about being paid under the table for having the children work late at night. The officer was also afraid that the blast may cause a crash, but he did not tell Landis of his concerns. That is wild. What's even sadder is that the parents of these kids were not fluent in English. Only one of them was, and Folsey hired a Vietnamese associate to explain the situation to them, like the fireworks, the helicopter swooping in, but the other parent was Chinese. So it's safe to say that the parents were not made properly aware of the dangers of the set and the scene itself, which makes what happened next even more tragic. So who were these children, and who was the main actor, Vic Morrow? With a strong film and television career before him, 53-year-old actor Vic Morrow was struggling to make a comeback, and given his age, was having trouble conveying his concerns to John Landis, who was known on set for having a very volatile temper. Well known for his role in the ABC series Combat, Vic was known to have a genuine dislike for firearms. Even if he had enlisted in the United States Navy at a young age, his co-star from Combat, Rick Jason, mentioned that Vic would use firearms in movies and TV, but he wanted nothing to do with them in his personal life. Wow, it's really roaring thunder outside. But now that I mention it, what I'm about to say next makes it all more painful and ironic. On the set of Twilight Zone the movie, while Landis was having his Coppola moment, was unsatisfied with an earlier scene in the film which involved a lot of shooting, and he wasn't happy with how the plants were being blown up by the bullets. The crew suggested that they could manually blow up some plants, but Landis wasn't a man that liked to wait around. According to several accounts, Landis came back from the special effects truck with 3 Remington shotguns and distributed them to his team, and then yelled "action," and Vic had to duck behind some banana plants underwater as bullets hailed on him. Half of these were real 12-gauge shotgun shells, while the other half was like plastic chuck tiles, both of them being potentially lethal, by the way. And the only reason Vic didn't die at that moment was because a stuntman pulled him away from the line of fire. Naturally, all of this left Vic really unsettled and needing to talk to someone, because this was a real problem. I mean, I would personally need therapy after that. But remember what I said before, even though Vic had a strong career before him, it wasn't a bit of a downward phase at that point. He was in his 50s, no new roles were coming in, and Landis was known to be a bit of a hothead. So he kept his concerns to himself itself, but the pilot of the helicopter did not. Dorcey Wingo, in his famous book The Rise and Fall of Captain Methane, Autobiography of a Maverick, was the pilot of this helicopter and stated in his book that he was quite anxious by how close the explosions were getting to his aircraft. This man was a veteran who had flown choppers in combat. Let's keep that in mind. So for him to say that, even as a newbie in the film industry, should be concerning. He had the same fears as Vic Morrow did of approaching Landis for fear of losing his gig because of Landis' short temper. So he instead went to the unit production manager Dan Allingham and complained that the pyrotechnics were dangerously close to his helicopter. Dan assured him that he would speak to Landis about this, but since we know what happened next, it's safe to say that his concerns were left unheard. This is a direct quote from Wingo's book. It was then that the special effects technician Jim Camomile, for reasons known only to himself and God, raked one electrified nail across several others that were wired to multiple gasoline firebombs intolerably close to the low hovering helicopter, sending the chopper and 100-odd movie makers and onlookers into a living hell. So his fear of the pyrotechnics being too close unfortunately came very true. But underneath his helicopter that night was not only Vic Morrow, but also two more people, Micah, age 7, and Renee, age 6, which I had trouble writing this part down because of what happened to them. So who were these two child actors and how were they hired for this film? Illegally. They were hired illegally. From the get-go, the hiring of 7-year-old Micah and 6-year-old Renee was unethical to say the least. John Landis didn't have the required permits to hire them, nor did he apply for the special waiver under state law that is required for children to work late at night. Either he knew that he would never get that waiver because no one in their right mind would allow children to work near explosives that close to them, or he just didn't care. I mean, who knows? What's confirmed is that even the casting directors didn't know that children would be involved in this scene. And in order to keep things quiet, the parents were paid under the table $500 each, like I mentioned before. When the call was put out that Landis required 2 Asian children for this scene, the production secretary of the film got hold of Renee's uncle, who then contacted his brother Renee's father, and they both agreed that Renee should be in this film. He also called a Vietnamese colleague, Daniel Lee, who had a young son named Micah. Micah loved posing for pictures and was a very outgoing young boy, and his parents decided that this would be a great opportunity for their son to be on camera on the big screen. Renee's parents and uncle also thought the same thing about their bubbling and outgoing little daughter. I mean, who wouldn't, right? Chen later testified in court that he was never made aware of how dangerously and carelessly the scene would be filmed, that he was never made aware of the helicopters and the explosives that would be near these kids. You know the sad part here? The concerns about having these children so dangerously close to the stunt was not lost on the crew. Production manager Dan Allingham also suggested to Landis that maybe they should use dwarf stunt people, or more colloquially little people, or even dummy dolls or anything else except real children, and Landis said no because it would look too phony. He even joked once and said, quote, "We will probably all be thrown in jail for this." So this accident was not exactly unforeseen. I mean, it's not like nobody warned anybody about the dangers of the stunt. The pilot himself voiced his concerns, but Landis just did not care. Allegedly. Moving on. I think we covered everything we need to cover about the settings, the people involved, and the lead up. Now let's talk about the disaster. Everything that happened in chronological order. The filming was set to start on the Indian Dunes in Santa Clarita, California, where that was used for many other films before, like The Color Purple, MacGyver, Escape from New York, and many more. During a test run of this scene, the children were terrified, and Vic Morrow, the actor who was supposed to be the rescuer in the scene, tried to make them relax by making funny faces at them, and it worked. So much so that Landis had to yell at the children to stop laughing and take the scene seriously. During the nighttime test runs, again, the shoot went very well. Why? Because there were no explosives involved during these test runs. That happened on the night of the incident, July 23, 1982. At 2:20 a.m., John Landis yells action. In the scene, Morrow's character was supposed to carry the 2 kids in both arms across a shallow river while being pursued by American soldiers in a helicopter. Piloted by Dorcey Wingo, the helicopter hovered 25 feet or 7.5 meters from the ground near a large mortar effect. Landis was unhappy happy with this distance. Over the mic, he kept yelling, "Get lower! Get lower!" According to the book Outrageous Conduct, as soon as the cameras rolled, pyrotechnic fireballs engulfed the helicopter. Wingo suffered a panic attack. The cameraman in the helicopter, Randall Robinson, said that they had then received conflicting instructions. The production assistant had told them to leave the area as quickly as possible, but Landis kept telling them to descend a little bit more. According to a testimony of another cameraman, Landis callously said, "The shot is turning out great, but we're going to lose the helicopter." Micah's father, Daniel, who was a Vietnam vet himself, said that the blasts reminded him of real detonations that he himself saw in combat. Because Landis kept yelling over the mic, Wingo then turned the helicopter 180 degrees to the left. The explosion was then detonated, and the tail rotor of the aircraft then caught the explosion. The metal lid on top of the mortar hit the tail rotor, causing it to fail and detach from the tail. Naturally, the helicopter spun out of control. Vic Morrow, who was right under the spinning aircraft, dropped 6-year-old Renee into the water, and when he reached below to grab her, the helicopter fell on him and the 2 children. Over 100 people watched on set as Vic Morrow and 7-year-old Micah were decapitated by the helicopter's main rotor blades, while 6-year-old Renee was crushed to death by the helicopter's right landing skid. I'm gonna have to take a break after reading all that, so I'll be right back, but you won't even notice it. So 3, 2, 1, and I'm back. I took about a week off to film some reaction videos and also to do some proper research on what happened after this incident, namely like the lawsuits, what did the families have to say, some direct quotes, and I pulled some of them and now I have the details. This was a direct quote from Daniel, Micah's father. "I was so horrified. I was screaming at the second blast. I fell down on the ground. I cried, God, I was so fearful and I knew danger. It was not something made up, but real danger." According to the book Outrageous Conduct, there was like a stunned, shocked silence until Renee's mother started screaming as she kneeled over her daughter's lifeless body. Morrow never got to deliver his scripted line, which was, "I'll keep you safe, kids, I promise. Nothing will ever hurt you, I swear to God." At the trial, 7-year-old Micah's father also testified, saying, quote, "The next thing I saw were people running for their lives, pushing, shoving, screaming. Then the body of my son." But the most insane part was this. According to the podcast Behind the Bastards, quote, "After the incident, John Landis felt like he needed to be in control of the situation and yells, 'That's a wrap.'" Yeah, I had to pause after I heard that. More things like that came up during the trial, and I will cover them right now, but before I do that, I just want to say, no art is worth this, okay? No art is worth this.
I thought something happened to my daughter.
I'm sorry, I think it's inappropriate for me at this time to say anything.
I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this, that this is about like the worst thing a parent can ever witness happen in front of them. This is like Pet Sematary levels of horrific, and that was a Stephen King novel. I don't think even Stephen King could come up with like something as horrific as this. I mentioned already about the reactions, about the immediate reactions of 7-year-old Micah's father and 6-year-old Renee's mother. Of course, they were inconsolable. You could see the impact this had on the rest of the family as well. But while researching for the testimony and the lawsuits, I wasn't prepared to read this part regarding the funerals. John Landis decided to attend all 3 funerals. Sit with that for a moment. Whether it was out of genuine remorse or to polish his image and conscience, who knows? But he chooses to attend all 3 funerals, and of course his mere presence was shocking to everyone at the scene. He apparently needed help to get to the podium to give a speech because he was unable to walk. Okay. The relatives just stared at him speechless while Renee's mother was sobbing, and he gave a eulogy that many sources claimed was incoherent and unplanned.
Tragedy strikes in an instant, but film is immortal. Perhaps we can take some solace in the knowledge that through his work in stage, television, and film, Vic lives forever.
He also went to Micah's funeral, where he seemed to be heavily medicated according to other sources, and he said that Jesus loves all the children of the world. Imagine being Daniel Lee at this point, Micah's father, having to hear this bullshit. But it was a little funny when he showed up at Vic Morrow's funeral. According to Dick Peabody, actor and long-term friend of Vic's, had this to say about his experience, quote, "A thin bearded man was coming down the aisle, seemingly unable to walk without assistance. It was director John Landis. His stooges helped him to the lectern and he began a rambling eulogy, unplanned, unrequested, unwanted, and shocking to Vic's family and friends. His mere presence at the funeral was offensive to them." I mean, of course. The most obnoxious remark he made, among many, was that he was proud to have directed Vic in what Vic himself considered the best performance of his career. Vic's girlfriend and his ex-wife Barbara both said that Vic thought the movie was a piece of shit and that he was ashamed to be connected with it. John Landis's eulogy sounded more like a promo for the film, end quote. So after all of this filibustering and dramatics, a grand jury indicted the filmmakers of the Twilight Zone, namely Landis, Folsey, Wingo, production manager Allingham, and explosive specialist Paul Stewart. This trial lasted for 9 months and went just about as you expected. Here are the details. I should make this clear right off the bat that they were not being charged for Vic Morrow's death, but for the illegal hiring of the children, and that the deaths occurred during this dangerous, unlawful act. That makes it not just an accident, but a criminal responsibility. It didn't take long for this trial to turn into a media circus. Landis's legal team started blaming the below-the-line people to avoid responsibility, which meant blaming the pilot, the pyrotechnics team, and everyone else under the sun. The first prosecution witness had testified that he and another defendant indicated that they feared legal repercussions for filming children near explosives used for special effects. Another witness, Donna Schumann, a production secretary working for the film, testified that Mr. Landis told his colleagues, quote, "I want it huge." Then he threw his arms up and he said, "Oh, we're going to jail." She even added that he mentioned, quote, "a slap on the wrist and a little fine unless they find out about the explosives. Then they'll throw my butt in jail," end quote. Randall Robinson, an assistant cameraman on board the helicopter, testified that Wingo, the pilot, tried to leave the area, but that we lost our control and regained it, and then I could feel something let go and we began spinning around in circles, end quote. Stephen Lydecker, another cameraman on board, testified that Landis had earlier shrugged off warnings about the stunt with the comment, "We may lose the helicopter." Lydecker also added, "I learned not to take anything the man said as a joke. It was his attitude. He didn't have time for suggestions from anybody," end quote. So it's very clear that people were aware of the dangers of these pyrotechnics being so close to the helicopter, including Landis, but he wanted his Vietnam War flick moment and he got it. In another testimony, Hollywood casting director Marcy Leroff said, quote, "I explained that to hire children for this scene would be illegal due to the hours they were shooting the scene, and I also mentioned that it sounded kind of dangerous." She added that he said, quote, "To hell with you guys, we'll get them off the streets ourselves." Mrs. Schumann also testified that she believed that she and the others have been blackballed by Hollywood for cooperating with the authorities in the Twilight Zone investigation. "I'm afraid I've been put out of the business permanently," she testified. It also came out later that when a stunt performer noted that the explosion was even more forceful than expected in an earlier helicopter shot, Landis reportedly replied, "If you think that was big, you haven't seen nothing yet." The parents had also offered their testimonies, claiming outright that they were never told that there would be helicopters or explosions on set, and they were told that there would be no danger, only noise. Lee, who had survived the Vietnam War, testified that he was terrified with the explosions, claiming that it brought back memories of the war. He also confirmed that he heard Landis telling the helicopter to fly lower. Overall, the trial was a media sensation. I mean, everyone waited with bated breath on the jury's verdict.
"We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, John Landis, not guilty of involuntary manslaughter, as charged in count 1 of the amended information."
9 months later, all the defendants were found not guilty of all charges. 3 people dead and no one went to prison. but that doesn't mean that everyone went scot-free. Fines were levied by the California Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as Cal OSHA, and the California Division of the Labor Standards Enforcement against Warner Brothers, the studio behind the picture, Levitsky Productions Inc., which was Landis's company, Western Helicopter Inc., Burbank Studios, and executive producer Frank Marshall and associate producer George Folsey Jr., among many others. The fines, totaling $82,375, were just about roughly one day's budget for the Twilight Zone. Settlements were also made to the families of the deceased. Attorneys mentioned that they could not confirm of a settlement number because of a gag order imposed by the Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Dana Sennett Henry. But one source mentioned that a firm agreement was reached by the families of the late Renee Chen, 6, and Micah Dinley, 7, for allegedly $2 million for each family. Vic Morrow's children also agreed to an undisclosed settlement in a separate lawsuit. Among the civil defendants were Warner Brothers Inc., which distributed the film, executive producer Steven Spielberg, and Bell Helicopters, who manufactured the aircraft. Believe it or not, John Landis appeared on Good Morning America after his acquittal to celebrate, and he invited all 12 members of the jury for the premiere of his new film Coming to America. And they did. It would also surprise you to know that over 16 filmmakers came out in support for Landis when the trial began. Names like Francis Ford Coppola, John Huston, Ron Howard, George Lucas, Sidney Lumet, and Billy Wilder signed an open letter in support for the filmmaker. Many director friends also appeared in cameos in films such as Into the Night or Spies Like Us, two features that Landis made between the deaths and his acquittal. Landis also directed the music video for Michael Jackson's Thriller and directed comedies such as Trading Places and Three Amigos. Dan Aykroyd, who appeared in the Landis-directed Twilight Zone prologue along with movies such as Trading Places and Spies Like Us, dismissed the tragedy. That was an industrial accident, nothing more, he said. After the trial, the Trading Places actor Eddie Murphy hired Landis to direct his 1988 comedy Coming to America, though they clashed heavily during the production. There was a funny moment during this production that I just had to add in here to really show what Landis was really like. Eddie Murphy once mentioned that he wanted to take out Sherry Headley along with the others to dinner one night. Landis pulled Headley aside and said, quote, "You stay away from Eddie. Don't go near him because he's going to fuck you and ruin my movie. He just wants your pussy." Eddie then realized that Landis was power hungry and a control freak just like he assumed, and even allegedly threatened to beat him up. While promoting the film, Eddie was asked if he'd ever work with Landis again, to which he replied, "Vic Morrow has a better chance of working with Landis than I do." But the film was a gigantic hit, and 6 years later, Eddie was directed by Landis again in Beverly Hills Cop 3, so there's that. But not everyone in Hollywood came out in raving support for Landis. As the producer of The Twilight Zone, Steven Spielberg maintains that he never knew about the hiring of the children. Years later, Spielberg said that the crash made me grow a little and left everyone who worked on the movie sick to the center of our souls. He added, "No movie is worth dying for. I think people are standing up much more now than ever before to producers and directors who ask too much. If something isn't safe, it's the right and responsibility of every actor or crew member to yell cut." He soon broke off his friendship with Landis after the accident. Brian De Palma, who directed The Untouchables, once said, quote, "I don't think Landis was railroaded. It's difficult to imagine putting all those elements in one place, helicopters, explosions, children, night shooting, and not treading a very thin line. You would try to steer clear of helicopters. By themselves, they are very dangerous, even with very experienced stunt people. And as soon as you have inexperienced people on a set, you are adding to the danger." James L. Brooks, who also directed Terms of Endearment and As Good as It Gets, also added, quote, "If you hire children illegally, pay them under the table, and then they get killed, that sounds like criminal negligence to me." So yeah, not everyone in Hollywood was cheering for Landis's actions. They knew the implications of what he had done and the risks he took that would impact Hollywood filmmaking forever. and it did. The Directors Guild of America began stricter enforcements for safety violations, while the Screen Actors Guild included new clauses in their contracts that allowed actors to step away from any scene where they felt unsafe on set. This ended the irresponsible tactics of authoritarian directors like Landis. Film unions and guilds reacted to this tragedy by creating safety committees and began publishing regular safety bulletins for its members and established a telephone hotline for directors to get quick answers to safety questions. The Directors Guild of America also started to discipline its members for violating any safety procedures on set, which it had not done prior to the crash. The Screen Actors Guild introduced a 24-hour hotline and a safety team for its members, and encouraged its members to use the right to refusal guaranteed in contracts if they believe that a scene is unsafe. Filming accidents dropped by 69.6% between 1982 and 1986, even though there were still 6 deaths on film sets. In 1987, the Office of the State Fire Marshal started the Motion Picture and Entertainment Safety Program in response to the accident. The program oversees motion picture and television use of pyrotechnic special effects in California. Like they always say, regulations are almost always written in blood. I started this conversation with the recent Rush shooting, and I'll end it here. No art should ever be this dangerous to work with. Actors, stuntmen, and the crew, when they walk into set, give their lives and their safety in the hands of these safety officers, experts, directors, production assistants, etc., whose job it is to oversee that the people who are enabling to make this vision come to life don't lose their lives in the process. Accidents can happen in any workplace, but when it is this preventable, like in the case of Rust, for instance, where all the armor had to do was not load the prop gun with lethal bullets, or in the case of the Twilight Zone, all Landis had to do was to keep a safe distance between the helicopter and the actors below, without screaming at them to get lower, and then we wouldn't have these issues. There's a reason why there are laws and regulations and unions in place, and unfortunately, it takes a severe tragedy like this helicopter accident to make like unhinged auteur directors to get their head out of their ass. Don't get me wrong, practical effects are still one of my favorite ways to like depict a scene, but the rise of CGI is also understandable as not only being cost effective, but also as a safer way of filming actors and stuntmen near explosions, helicopters, and gunfire. I guess that because no one went to jail for this event kept me up at night and made me want to make this video, but let this video be a lesson to all emerging filmmakers out there. Safety first. Your actors are not props. Your stuntmen are not invincible. Responsibility must be taken by the people in charge so that low-rung people don't become an afterthought. The backbone of this channel are our lovely patrons. On Patreon, I post not only full-length movie reactions behind the scenes, but also cover the entire process of becoming a content creator. Thanks to you guys, my channel is still active despite copyright hassles and demonetization for covering controversial topics. I thank all my members and patrons, and if you enjoyed my videos, you can consider supporting, or you can make a one-time donation and buy me a coffee at Tree Nation. Thank you so much for sticking till the end. I hope you enjoyed, and if you'd like to see more, here's a video you might like or a playlist you might enjoy. See you next video.